Hello friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. There's a 24-hour quick check on Route 19 that was the only saving grace during my week of night shifts. In the dead of a Tennessee night, it's the only beacon of light for miles. This was just a few nights ago, so the memory is still sharp, every detail crystal clear. My sleep schedule was completely backwards, and by 2 a.m., a restlessness had sunk deep into my bones. I was buzzing from too much coffee and not enough human interaction, so I decided a drive and a soda were the only cure. The road was a black ribbon, silent except for the hum of my tires. The quick check glowed like a spaceship that had landed in the middle of nowhere. Inside, it was all fluorescent buzz and the low hum of refrigerators. Normal, perfectly normal. I grabbed a drink and was heading to the counter when I saw him. At first, my brain didn't even register it. A man, just sitting cross-legged on the floor in the snack aisle. He was perfectly still, staring at the cold drink case like it was a television screen. My first thought was to just pay and leave, but curiosity got the better of me. I coughed, pretended to look at some chips, anything to seem casual. I didn't want him to think I was staring, but I had to get a look at his face, so I looped around the next aisle, planning to just glance down his row as I passed. But the moment I turned the corner, his head snapped towards me. He wasn't just looking, he was fixated. His eyes were glassy and wide, unblinking. His whole body was coiled, tense, like he was a spring about to release. And the expression, it was completely blank. No anger, no curiosity. Just a dead, empty stare that seemed to look right through me. The air went cold. I quickly looked away, my heart hammering against my ribs. I paid for my drink, my hands fumbling with the cash, and walked as calmly as I could to my car. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that it was just a weird guy in a convenience store. I started the engine and pulled onto the dark road, relieved to be away from there. I honestly thought that was the end of it, but the relief was short-lived. In the pristine darkness of my rearview mirror, a pair of headlights flared to life. The relief was short-lived. In the pristine darkness of my rearview mirror, a pair of headlights flared to life. But let me rewind a little. To understand why those headlights felt like a death sentence, you need to understand the landscape of my life last week. I live in a pocket of rural Tennessee where the sidewalks roll up at dusk, and the most exciting event after 9 p.m. is a possum rummaging through your trash cans. It's the kind of quiet that isn't peaceful. It's heavy, a blanket of silence that makes every little sound, the creak of a house settling, the scuttle of something in the walls, feel like an intrusion. In the middle of all that, nothing. The 24-hour quick check on Route 19 was more than just a store. It was an outpost of sanity, a temple of fluorescent light and junk food that promised you weren't completely alone in the world. My name is Robert, and my internal clock was permanently set to the witching hour. A week of back-to-back night shifts as a security supervisor at a data storage facility had my days and nights flipped. While the rest of the world dreamed, I was watching grainy CCTV feeds of empty hallways. My only company, the low hum of servers, and the occasional ping of a system check. By 2 a.m. on my nights off, a frantic energy would crawl under my skin. It was a mix of caffeine jitters, sleep deprivation, and a profound loneliness that only someone who's been awake while the entire world sleeps can understand. Those late-night drives to the quick check weren't just errands. They were rituals. They were a way to prove to myself that I was still part of the living, that there was a world beyond the four walls of my quiet house and the monotonous glow of monitor screens. The drive itself was a study in solitude. My old sedan was the only thing moving on Route 19, its headlights carving a narrow tunnel through an ocean of darkness. The fields on either side swallowed the light, giving nothing back. The hum of my tires on the asphalt was a hypnotic, lonely sound, a steady shush, shush, shush that seemed to sync with the rhythm of my own breathing. I knew every dip and curve of that road, every mailbox that leaned a little too far, every farmhouse with a single lonely porch light burning. I'd passed the quick-check clerk, an older guy named Dave with a perpetual look of weary resignation. Enough times that we'd graduated from nods to a half-hearted, "How's it going?" It was a fragile, familiar routine. That night, the air coming through the cracked window smelled of cut grass and damp earth, the scent of a world at rest. When the store's lights appeared in the distance, they didn't look welcoming. They looked alien. A stark, white and green beacon that had crash-landed in the middle of the fields, throwing long, distorted shadows of petrol pumps across the concrete. Pulling into the lot and hearing the gravel crunch under my tires was always the first step back to normalcy. Inside, the reality was both comforting and strangely sterile. The buzz of the fluorescers was a higher pitch than the one at my work, and the refrigerators lining the walls let out a low, collective groan. It was bright, too bright, making everything look washed out and slightly unreal. Dave was at the register, chin propped on his hand, looking half asleep. I gave him a small wave and headed to the cooler to grab a soda. The normality of it all was a sedative. I was just another night shift zombie on a replenishment run. I ordered a greasy breakfast sandwich from the hot counter, and knowing it would take a minute, wandered into the snack aisle to kill time. The mix of caffeine and my own restless legs made it impossible to just stand and wait. That's when I saw him. My brain, lulled by the routine, initially filed him away as a non-threat. A dark shape on the floor at the end of the aisle. A stack of boxes, maybe. A discarded coat. But my feet slowed before my conscious mind had even processed why. It was a person. A man, sitting cross-legged on the linoleum tile, facing the closed door of a drink cooler. He was as still as a statue, not a fidget, not a twitch. He wasn't looking at the products. He was just staring at the refrigerator itself, like he was trying to decipher a hidden code in its logo. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. This was wrong. This was outside the script. The late-night crowd at the Quick Check was a predictable bunch. Tired truckers, fellow shift workers, and the occasional kid trying to sneak cigarettes. They moved, they browsed. They didn't park themselves on the floor like a piece of human furniture. My first sane thought was to abort. Just turn around, pay for my drink, and wait for my sandwich by the car. But a stronger, more primal instinct took over. Curiosity, mixed with a need to assess the threat. I couldn't just leave without knowing what I was dealing with. I coughed, a short, polite sound that felt absurdly loud in the quiet store. I pretended to suddenly develop a deep interest in the variety of barbecue chips. My back to him. I could feel a prickle on my neck, the unsettling sensation of being observed, even though his back was to me. I needed to see his face. A face tells you everything. Is this person sad, high, dangerous, or just lost? Feigning a casual pace, I looped into the adjacent aisle, my plan simple, and I thought, clever. I'd walk to the end, turn the corner as if heading to the freezers, cast a single swift glance down his aisle to get a look at his profile, and then keep walking. I'd have my intel and be gone before he even noticed. It was the worst plan I've ever had. The moment I turned the corner, his head snapped towards me. It wasn't a turn. It was a whip-crack motion, unnaturally fast and precise. There was no lead-up, no shift of the shoulders. 1 second he was facing the fridge. The next, his entire head was rotated a full 90 degrees. His gaze locked directly on me. I froze. My feet forgot how to move. My brain forgot its mission. He wasn't just looking. He was fixated. His eyes were glassy and wide, unblinking. In the harsh store light, they looked like wet marbles. His lip was vibrating, a frantic, subtle quiver that was at odds with the absolute stillness of the rest of his face. His whole body was coiled, the muscles in his neck straining from the awkward angle of his head. He was wearing a brown jacket, too heavy for the season, and his hands were clenched into white-knuckled fists on his knees. And the expression, God, the expression. It was completely, utterly blank. No anger, no curiosity, no confusion. Just a dead, empty stare that seemed to look right through me, into some terrible private void only he could see. The air in the aisle went cold. The hum of the refrigerator seemed to amplify, filling my skull. We stayed like that for what felt like a minute, trapped in that silent, horrifying standoff. He was far from normal. He was on something, or he was having a psychotic break, or he was something else entirely. My mind raced through the possibilities, each one more frightening than the last. Finally, with a force of will that felt Herculean, I averted my eyes. He's probably just high, I muttered under my breath, the words feeling flimsy and false. Just a junkie spacing out. Don't make it a thing. But my heartbeat was a frantic drum against my ribs, a physiological betrayal of my calm interior monologue. I walked quickly to the front, my back feeling intensely vulnerable. expecting at any moment to feel a hand on my shoulder. "Sandwiches up, Rob," Dave said, his voice gruff with sleep. I flinched. I practically threw my money at him, my hands fumbling with the bills. I didn't wait for change. "Keep it," I stammered, grabbing the paper-wrapped sandwich and my soda. I didn't look back. I pushed through the glass doors, the electronic chime sounding like an alarm bell, and strode as calmly as I could to my car. Every shadow between the petrol pumps seemed to shift and move. Slamming the door shut and hitting the lock button was like achieving sanctuary. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I started the engine, the familiar rumble of small comfort. "You're being ridiculous," I told my reflection in the rearview mirror. "Just a weird guy. It's over." I pulled out of the lot and onto the dark mouth of Route 19, the store light shrinking in my mirror. The tension in my shoulders began to ease. I honestly, truly believed that was the end of it. And that's when I saw him again. Not in my rear view, but in my side mirror as I made the turn. The doors of the quick check slid open, and the man in the brown jacket stepped out into the parking lot. He didn't look around for his car. He didn't light a cigarette. He just stood there, his dead-eyed stare following my retreating vehicle. A cold dread, purer than any I'd felt inside the store, washed over me. I focused ahead on the black ribbon of road and pressed the accelerator. A few seconds later, the dread solidified into a terrifying reality. In the pristine darkness of my rearview mirror, a pair of headlights flared to life, pulling out from the lot behind me. They quickly closed the distance, growing from pinpricks to blinding orbs of white light. They were following me. The 2 points of light in my rearview mirror were no longer just headlights. They were eyes, predatory, unblinking eyes, and they were fixed on me. My first, naive hope was that it was a coincidence. Another night owl heading home, someone who lived even deeper in the sticks than I did. I slowed my pace slightly, hugging the right side of the winding road to give them plenty of room to pass. The etiquette of the rural night road is simple. You let the faster car go by. But the vehicle didn't pass. It slowed with me, maintaining the same exact shrinking distance between us. The hum of my tires was now underscored by a second, slightly deeper engine note, a constant, menacing bass line to my growing panic. "Okay, Robert, don't lose it," I whispered, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. "He's probably just drunk or lost." But the driver from the quick check hadn't looked drunk. He'd looked empty, and now that emptiness was following me, I decided to test it. I pressed down on the accelerator, pushing my old sedan to 10 over the limit. The engine groaned, but the car responded. I watched the mirror. For a second, the headlights fell back, and a flicker of relief passed through me. Then, they surged forward, closing the gap in a matter of seconds, settling in even closer than before. The light flooded my car, bleaching the interior a harsh, sterile white. I could see the ghost of my own terrified face reflected in the windshield. My heart was a frantic bird beating against my ribs. I tried another tactic, slowing to a crawl near a dirt farm road that I knew was coming up on the left. I put on my turn signal, a slow, Rhythmic. Click, click, click. That sounded like a countdown. The truck behind me didn't slow. It just loomed. At the last possible second, I swerved the wheel back straight and accelerated. A pathetic attempt to fake him out. It was useless. The truck mirrored my move with an unnerving, fluid precision, its high beams never wavering. It was playing with me. This wasn't a chase yet. It was a herding. That's when the fear curdled into pure, undiluted horror. We hit a straight, empty stretch of road, and the truck pulled out slightly into the oncoming lane. Not to pass, just to get a clear line of sight. For a single, frozen second, the interior of the pickup's cab was illuminated by its own dashboard lights. It was him, the man in the brown jacket. His hands were at the 10 and 2 position on the wheel, his posture still unnaturally rigid. And his face, he wasn't staring blankly ahead. He was looking directly at me, and on his lips was the faintest, most terrifying suggestion of a smile. It wasn't a smile of joy or amusement. It was a smile of purpose, the smile of a predator that has finally run its prey to ground. The chase began in earnest. A long, deafening blare of the truck's horn shattered the night silence. The engine roared, and the rust-colored grille of the pickup filled my entire rearview mirror. The impact was violent and metallic. My car jolted forward, the seatbelt locking and digging into my shoulder. The screech of mangled metal was deafening. He'd rammed me. "Jesus!" I screamed, my voice lost inside the car. I stomped on the gas, the sedan lurching forward. The truck matched my speed effortlessly. We were flying down Route 19, 2 missiles in the dark. The familiar curves of the road were now deadly threats. My tires squealed in protest as I swerved through a bend. Fighting to keep control, the pickup stayed glued to my bumper, its horn blaring again, a long, continuous note of rage that drowned out all thought. He rammed me a second time, harder this time. The rear of my car fishtailed wildly. I wrestled with the wheel, my arms burning with the effort, somehow managing to straighten out. I could feel the crumpled metal of my trunk grating against the tires. A warning light flickered on my dashboard. I was losing this car. I was losing this fight. I couldn't outrun him. His truck was bigger, more powerful. I couldn't lose him on these roads. He knew them as well as I did, his movements anticipating my every desperate swerve. My mind, frantic and slippery, seized on a single insane idea. It was a move I'd seen in a movie, a last-ditch, all-or-nothing gamble. Up ahead was the turnoff for Miller's Creek, a sharp right-hand bend marked by a crooked old oak tree. It was my only chance. "Okay, you son of a bitch," I breathed, my voice trembling. "You want to follow me? Follow me." I slowed down, telegraphing my move. I clicked on my right turn signal. The pickup slowed with me, confident, predatory. I could almost feel his triumph. As I approached the turn, I swung the wheel hard to the right, as if taking the bend at speed. The truck mimicked my move, surging into the turn behind me. But I never completed the turn. In the middle of the arc, with the truck committed, I slammed my foot onto the brake pedal with all my strength. My car screamed, tires locking up, skidding sideways across the damp asphalt. The world became a dizzying blur of trees and headlights. The pickup had no time to react. It tried to swerve, but its momentum was too great. It shot past my driver's side door, so close I could see the rust flakes on its panels. For a split second, the man's face was framed in his window, the faint smile replaced by a wide-eyed shock. Then, the pickup left the road. It hit the soft shoulder, its front tire catching the deep drainage ditch. The world seemed to move in slow, silent frames. The truck nosed down, then flipped, a slow, brutal cartwheel of metal and glass. It landed on its roof in the ditch with a final, sickening crunch of collapsing steel. Then, silence, or almost silence. My car had stalled, sitting diagonally across the road. The only sounds were the ticking of my hot engine and the frantic, ragged gasps of my own breathing. And then, another sound pierced the night. One long, uninterrupted blare from the pickup's horn, its weight having landed on the steering wheel. It was a dying animal's wail, a single, sustained note of electronic agony. I sat there, paralyzed, for what felt like an eternity. I had to see. I had to know. I fumbled for the door handle, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip it. I stumbled out onto the road, the cool night air doing nothing to calm the fire in my nerves. I approached the overturned truck, my feet feeling like blocks of wood. The headlights were shattered, but one tail light was still blinking a weak, erratic red, illuminating the grotesque scene. The engine hissed. The smell of gasoline and upturned earth filled the air. I crept closer, peering into the shattered driver's side window, now pointing at the sky. The cab was empty. No, that wasn't possible. I saw him. I saw him go in. I stumbled around to the other side, my heart in my throat. The passenger window was also broken. No one. The seats were stained and torn, but there was no body, no blood, no sign of the man in the brown jacket. It was as if the truck had been driving itself. My eyes scanned the ground. The soft mud of the ditch was churned up, and there, leading away from the wreck, was a single set of footprints. They marched, steady and purposeful, away from the road and into the thick, pitch-black wall of the forest. I stood there, watching until they disappeared into the shadows, the blaring horn the only proof any of it had ever happened. The police arrived 20 minutes later, their sirens cutting through the night. They found me sitting on the bumper of my wrecked car, staring into the woods. They searched the truck, searched the area with flashlights. They found the footprints, just as I had. They followed them until the undergrowth grew too thick, and the trail simply vanished. The official report called it a hit and run with the driver fleeing the scene. They never found him. Nothing was ever found, except my dented trunk and the echo of that God-forsaken horn, which still blares in my dreams. I moved out of that town 2 weeks later. I couldn't sleep. Every set of headlights behind me was his. Every quiet sound was the creak of his jacket. The cops said he was probably just a meth head who got lucky. But I saw his eyes. I know what I saw. Sometimes, The eyes you meet in passing don't stop looking at you. They follow you home. They follow you into your dreams. And they remind you that the horror you experience is just one story of the night. For Jeffrey Huffman, a delivery driver from Albuquerque, the horror wasn't a pair of pursuing headlights, but a pair of flashing hazard lights on a lonely New Mexico highway, and a woman whose plea for help was the deadliest trap of all. My name is Jeffrey Huffman, and for 10 years, the night road was my church. While Robert A. Wood was being hunted down in Tennessee, I was making my peace with the emptiness of the New Mexico desert. I drove a delivery van for a small courier service out of Albuquerque, specializing in overnight packages that absolutely, positively had to be there by 8 a.m. It's a solitary life, a rhythm of engine hum, talk radio, and the long, dark stretches between the islands of light we call gas stations. You get used to your own company. You learn the language of the dark, the way a coyote's eyes reflect your headlights like twin embers, the specific silence of a landscape that wants nothing from you. But after hearing what happened to Robert, a new seed of paranoia took root. His story of the dead-eyed man and the pursuing truck made me look twice at every set of headlights in my own rear view. It's funny how one person's nightmare can infect your own, even from 1,000 miles away. I told myself his was a fluke, a one-in-a-million encounter with a singular brand of crazy. The desert, I reasoned, was different. Its dangers were more straightforward. Dehydration, a blown tire miles from nowhere, a sleepy driver drifting into your lane. It wasn't personal. What happened to me on a moonlit stretch of highway near Socorro proved how dangerously wrong I was. My horror didn't chase me. It waited for me flashing a false plea for help. It was past 1 a.m., and I was in the home stretch of my route, a barren corridor of Highway 60, where the only signs of life are the skeletal remains of long-dead businesses and the occasional ghost town. The moon was a cold, sharp sliver of bone in a sky choked with stars, casting just enough light to turn the sagebrush into huddled gray shapes. I had the window cracked, the dry, chill air keeping me alert. My thermos of coffee was empty, and my mind was already at the depot, on the paperwork, on my bed. That's when I saw them. Up ahead, a pair of hazard lights flashed a frantic, rhythmic red in the vast darkness. A car was pulled over on the narrow shoulder, a small black hatchback, and beside it, a figure waved their arms, a pale face turned towards my approaching headlights. My foot instinctively lifted from the accelerator. The protocol, the one every long-haul driver recites like a mantra, screamed in my head. Don't stop. Call it in. Keep driving. It's the smart thing, the safe thing. But another part of me, the part raised to help a stranger in need, argued back. It was a woman. She looked young. Her face, bleached by my headlights, was a mask of pure panic. What if her phone was dead? What if it was a real emergency, a medical issue, a child in the car? The desert night is unforgiving. Leaving someone out here felt like a death sentence. I made the choice that would haunt me. I slowed down, my tires crunching on the gravel as I pulled to a stop about 20 yards ahead of her, leaving myself an out. I left the engine running. My own personal rule. I lowered the window, the desert air flooding in, carrying a fine dust and the faint metallic smell of coolant. "You need help?" I called out, my voice sounding too loud in the immense silence. She hurried towards me, her steps unsteady. "Oh, thank God you stopped," she gasped, her voice trembling. Too much. It was a performance. My car just died. I don't know what happened. My phone's dead. I've been out here for almost an hour. She clutched her elbows, shivering dramatically in the cool air. Her name, she said, was Lisa. Lisa Manchester. My eyes scanned her, then the car. A black hatchback. No other lights on inside. It looked ordinary, but something was off. Her fear was a layer too thick, like bad acting. The pauses were a beat too long, as if she was waiting for a cue. Her eyes, wide and pleading, kept flicking past me, towards the back of her own car. "Pop the hood," I said, my voice flat. "I can take a look." I shouldn't have gotten out. Every instinct Robert's story had sharpened in me was now screaming. But I was committed. The social contract was signed. I opened my door, the interior dome light flooding the cab, and stepped out. The gravel shifted under my boots. The silence out here was profound, broken only by the tick, tick, tick of my cooling engine and the frantic pulse of her hazard lights. I walked towards the front of her hatchback, Lisa trailing a step behind me. It just made this weird knocking sound, and then everything went dark. She prattled on, her story a little too detailed. As I reached for the hood release, my eyes dropped to the ground. The dirt on the shoulder was soft, and in the mixed glow of my taillights and the moon, I saw them. Footprints. More than one set. A jumble of them. Leading from the driver's side door around to the back of the hatchback. But Lisa had said she'd been alone. She'd been standing by the driver's side when I arrived. So why were there fresh prints leading behind the car, where no one should have been? My blood went cold. I froze, my hand hovering over the hood latch. I strained my ears, listening past her voice, past the idling of my van. And I heard it. A faint, sibilant sound. A whisper. It came from directly behind the hatchback. It wasn't a breakdown. It was a stage. And I had just walked into the middle of the play. Time seemed to warp, slowing to a thick, syrupy crawl. My mind, trained by years of assessing risks on the road, connected the dots with terrifying speed. The stalled car, perfectly positioned. The overly dramatic damsel. The footprints. The whisper. This was an ambush. A roadside trap. They were waiting for me to be distracted, head under the hood, back turned. Lisa saw the change in my posture. She saw the understanding dawn on my face. Her performative fear melted away, replaced by a flat, cold calculation. Her eyes locked with mine, and in that moment, all pretense was gone. I didn't think. I moved. I shoved backwards, away from the car, my boots scrambling in the gravel. I spun towards my van, my heart hammering a frantic drum against my ribs. A shadow shifted from behind the hatchback. A man, rising from a crouch, his form solid and menacing in the gloom. Farther down the road, another silhouette detached itself from the darkness, starting to jog towards us. They had me boxed in. "Hey!" Lisa shouted, her voice now sharp and commanding, devoid of its earlier tremor. I didn't look back. I lunged for my open driver's side door, my only thought to get back in the sanctuary of my van, to lock the doors and get the hell out of this death trap. I threw myself into the seat, my hand already reaching for the door handle to slam it shut. I was a half-second too slow. As the door began to swing closed, a figure darted forward. It was Lisa. With a surprising, brutal strength, she yanked the back passenger door of my van, the door I always kept unlocked for easy access to my cargo, and threw herself inside. The door slammed shut. The interior light went out, plunging the back of my van into darkness. I was no longer alone. I was trapped in a moving metal box with one of my ambushers. Her ragged breathing filled the small space, a stark contrast to the silence of the desert night now outside my locked door. The trap had not been sprung. It had simply changed shape. The door slammed shut, the lock clicked, and I was no longer alone in my van. For a single heart-stopping second, there was only the sound of my own ragged breathing and the frantic thumping of my heart. Then, a voice from the darkness behind me, shrill and laced with a new manufactured terror. "Drive! Please, you have to drive! They're going to kill me!" It was Lisa. Her performance had shifted, adapted. She was no longer the stranded motorist. She was the fleeing victim. She scrambled over the back of the passenger seat, tumbling into the footwell before hauling herself up into the seat itself. She was a whirlwind of panicked motion, her eyes wide as she stared out the back window. "They're coming! Go, go, go!" My hands were glued to the steering wheel, my knuckles bone white. Every instinct, every piece of evidence my eyes had just taken in, told me this was a lie. The footprints, the whisper, the man crouching behind the car. It was a trap, and she was part of it. But the human brain is a fragile thing, and for a fleeting, terrifying moment, a sliver of doubt wormed its way in. What if I was wrong? What if she was a victim too? What if those men were holding her hostage, and she saw her chance to escape? The part of me that wanted to believe in basic human decency clung to that doubt. It lasted for maybe 3 seconds. I stomped on the accelerator. The van lurched forward, gravel spraying behind us. In the rear-view mirror, I saw the 2 men stop in the middle of the road, their figures shrinking, but not running. They just stood there, watching us go. They didn't look angry or frantic. They looked disappointed, like hunters who had seen a prize duck out of the net. "Oh God, thank you, Lisa sobbed, collapsing against the passenger window. She was good. She was really good. Her whole body trembled. She hugged her large canvas purse to her chest like a life preserver. "Who were they?" I asked, my voice tight. I kept my eyes glued to the road, but every sense was focused on her. I don't know, they came out of nowhere. They must have been following me. She was babbling, her story thin and full of holes. They had a knife. They said they were going to... Her words trailed off as she fumbled with the clasp of her purse. It was a nervous, reflexive gesture, but my entire world narrowed to that single action. My right hand, which had been resting on the gear shift, slowly, imperceptibly, drifted to the center console. I never drove unarmed, not on these roads, not after hearing stories like Robert's. The lock clicked open with a soft sound that was louder than a gunshot in the tense silence of the cab. "My phone," she mumbled, her voice still shaking but with a new, focused intensity. "I need to see if it has any charge now that we're moving." Her hand dipped into the purse. I didn't see a phone. I saw her fingers close around something else. Something that made a dull, metallic clink. A sound I recognized from 1,000 shipments. The sound of hardened plastic and metal teeth. Zip ties. In that moment, the last vestige of doubt evaporated, burned away by a cold, clear fury. She wasn't reaching for a phone. She was reaching for a weapon. She was going to try and restrain me while I was driving. I didn't shout. I didn't hesitate. In one fluid motion, my hand came up from the console, and the dull gleam of blued steel caught the dashboard lights. I leveled my sidearm at her, my arm locked, my finger resting along the frame. "Don't," I said. The word was quiet, flat, and absolute. She froze. Her hand was still inside the purse. Her eyes, wide and shocked, locked onto the barrel of the gun. The fake trembling stopped. The act was over. "Take your hand out," I commanded, my voice low and steady, belying the storm raging inside me. Slowly, 2 fingers, empty. She did as she was told, her movements now cautious, deliberate. Her fingers emerged, not holding a phone, but pinching the corner of a small rectangular battery. A burner phone battery. Proof her phone had never been dead at all. "Now push the purse onto the floor with your foot," I said. She complied. The bag hit the floor with a heavy thud, and the contents spilled out slightly. A jumble of zip ties, the kind law enforcement uses. A roll of duct tape. A small, cheap-looking knife. The tools of a kidnapper. The tools of a road pirate. The silence that followed was thicker and more terrifying than any scream. The van hurtled through the darkness, a metal coffin containing 2 people who had just seen the masks they were wearing for each other completely torn away. "It wasn't supposed to go like this," she whispered, her voice hollow. All the performance was gone, leaving behind a raw, exhausted shell of a person. "How was it supposed to go?" I asked, the gun never wavering. "You get me to stop, I get out. Your friends jump me. You rob me, and then what? Leave me tied up in the desert. In the trunk of my own van?" She stared straight ahead, her profile pale in the dashboard glow. "We just needed the van, the cargo. I was just supposed to lure you, keep you distracted. I've never hurt anyone," She said it like she was trying to convince herself. It was just for money. We lost our jobs, the bills. Don't, I cut her off, the fury bubbling over. Don't you dare give me the sob story. You weren't a victim back there. You were the bait. You looked me in the eye and you lied to get me to let my guard down. You held the door open for them. She had no answer to that. We drove in silence for another 10 miles, the only sound the whine of the engine and the rush of wind outside. I saw the glow of an all-night gas station and truck stop ahead, a sprawling oasis of light. It was my chance. I pulled off the highway and into the brightly lit complex, parking directly under a floodlight near the air and water station, away from the main building. I kept the engine running. Get out, I said. She looked at me, genuine fear in her eyes for the first time. They'll find me. They'll kill me for failing. That's not my problem, I said, my voice like iron. You made your choices. I'm making mine. Get out, now. She hesitated, her eyes flicking from my face to the gun and back. Then, slowly, she opened the door and stepped out into the pool of light. I didn't wait for her to shut it. I threw the van into drive and sped away, watching in the rear view as she stood alone, a small, forlorn figure, quickly swallowed by the night. I drove straight to the nearest sheriff's outpost, my hands shaking only after I had parked and the adrenaline began to fade. The aftermath was a blur of statements and evidence. My spilled purse, with its damning contents, was enough. The police found the black hatchback abandoned a few hours later. They caught the two men 2 days after that, trying the same stunt 50 miles down the road. They were tied to a string of highway robberies, violent ones. The official report called it a de-escalation of a potential felony. They called me a hero. The word felt like ash in my mouth. Lisa Manchester vanished. She was never seen again. The men, when questioned, claimed she was the mastermind, that she was the one who approached drivers because no one would suspect a woman. They said she just disappeared after my van drove away. Whether she was a victim of her accomplices or simply a ghost who faded back into the darkness she came from, I'll never know. I finished my route that night, but I never took another. I resigned the next week. I couldn't sit in that driver's seat again, knowing that the next set of flashing hazard lights, the next frantic wave, could be another Lisa. Robert's story taught me that monsters chase you. My story taught me something worse. Sometimes, the ones waving for help are just holding the door open for evil. They smile, they cry, they make you believe you're the hero, right up until the moment they hand you the zip ties. Every driver who stops for kindness meets a different kind of night. For Eva J. Bush, a cross-country traveler, her act of kindness was simply stopping to rest. But in a lonely Kansas gas station, she would learn that some predators don't need to lure you. They just wait for you to walk right into their cage. My name is Eva J. Bush, and the open road is both my office and my sanctuary. As a travel blogger, my life is a tapestry woven from highway stripes and the ever-changing scenery outside my windshield. I'd followed Jeffrey Huffman's story online, The news articles about the hatchback trap that had gone semi-viral in our niche communities of long-haul drivers and solo travelers. It chilled me, the way he described the woman's performance, the way kindness was weaponized. It made me double-check my doors at every stop, but I comforted myself with a simple truth. I wasn't picking anyone up. My danger wouldn't come from a person I let in. It would come from a place I chose to enter. I was wrong. The lesson the Kansas night taught me was more intimate, more violating. It wasn't about a trap you could see from a distance. It was about the one waiting for you in a space where you're supposed to be safe, where your guard is down. My horror didn't wave me down. It was already in the ladies' room, waiting. I was on a marathon drive from Colorado to Missouri, chasing the fading violet light of a summer sunset that eventually bled into an inky, star-dusted black. The kind of tiredness that seeps into your bones had set in around 1 a.m., making my eyelids heavy and my reactions slow. I needed coffee, a bathroom, and a few minutes to stand on solid ground that wasn't vibrating with engine hum. I took the next exit, which promised gas, food, and lodging, but delivered only one of the three. The gas station sat alone in a sea of flat, sleeping farmland, a low-slung concrete block building under a single, flickering mercury vapor light that buzzed like an angry insect. The forecourt was empty, the pumps looking like ancient desiccated skeletons. Through the grimy window, I could see a single cashier, a young man with his head pillowed on his arms, fast asleep at the counter. The place had an air of profound abandonment, a feeling that if I blinked, the darkness might just swallow it whole. I parked directly under the flickering light, a feeble attempt at security, and hurried inside. The electronic door chime was a weak, dying sound. The cashier didn't stir. The air inside was stale, thick with the smell of old coffee and disinfectant. I gave a wide berth to the snoozing attendant and made a beeline for the restroom, my keys poking through my clenched fingers, a urban habit that felt laughably inadequate here. I just needed a quick stop before facing the long, dark stretch of I-70 ahead. The women's room was a time capsule of cracked tile and grim lighting. It was a single room with 2 stalls and a sink, the kind where you're never truly alone, but feel utterly isolated. I pushed the first stall open, finding it clean enough, and did what I needed to do, the silence pressing in on me. As I was finishing, I heard the main door to the restroom open and then click shut. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. The creak of a boot on linoleum. I froze, my hand on the lock. I held my breath, listening. The footsteps didn't go to the other stall. They just stopped in the middle of the room. I waited, my heart beginning to tap out a frantic rhythm. Maybe it was just another traveler. Maybe they were checking their phone. Gathering my courage, I unlatched the stall door and stepped out. And there she was, a woman, standing motionless between the stalls and the sink. She was wearing a heavy navy blue winter coat, the thick, quilted kind, with a wool collar pulled up high. In the suffocating July heat, it was a surreal, jarring sight. Beads of sweat dotted her upper lip and forehead, but she made no move to take the coat off. Her hands were buried deep in the pockets. Our eyes met in the mirror above the sink. She offered a faint, thin smile. Not friendly, not threatening, just a gesture, a placeholder for an expression. She said nothing. Hi, I managed, my voice sounding brittle. She didn't reply. Her smile didn't change. Her eyes, a pale, watery blue, remained fixed on my reflection. The air grew thick and heavy. I moved to the sink, turning on the faucet. The roar of the water impossibly loud in the small room. I focused on the mundane task of washing my hands. The routine of it, a tiny anchor in a suddenly unmoored reality. I could feel her presence behind me, a solid, silent weight. In the mirror, I saw her reflection hadn't moved. She was still staring, still smiling that empty smile. Then, I heard the soft creak of her boots as she shifted her weight. My eyes darted down to the reflection in the polished chrome base of the faucet. I could see the distorted shape of her legs. She wasn't moving toward the door. She was just watching me. My skin began to crawl. Every instinct, every story I'd ever heard about predators and prey was screaming at me now. This was wrong. This was all wrong. I shut off the water and grabbed a rough paper towel. My movements hurried. I needed to get out. Now. As I turned from the sink, she finally moved. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, then walked past me towards the exit. Relief, warm and dizzying, flooded through me. It was over. Just a weird, socially awkward person. I was letting my imagination, fueled by Jeffrey's story, get the better of me. I heard the main restroom door open. The electronic chime sounded, tinny and weak. Bing bong. She was gone. I let out a shaky breath, tossing the paper towel into the bin. I took a step toward the door, ready to run to my car and put this whole creepy pit stop behind me. And then I stopped. My eyes, drawn down by some primal, subconscious warning, fell to the gap beneath the door of the second stall, the one that had been closed when I entered. There, planted firmly on the linoleum, was a pair of worn, brown leather work boots. The toes were pointed outward, facing the room, facing me. The chime, the sound of the door. It had been a trick, a pantomime. She hadn't left. She had opened and closed the door to make me think she had left, and then she had slipped silently into the stall to wait. For me, the blood drained from my face. A cold, sharp terror, purer than any I had ever known, seized me. I was locked in this tiny, tiled room with her. She was standing in that stall, not moving, not making a sound, just waiting. I took a stumbling step backward, my back hitting the cold tile wall. The only sound was the frantic thudding of my own heart and the drip, drip, drip of the faulty faucet. I strained my ears, listening for any sound from the stall. There was none. No rustle of clothing, no shift of weight, just silence. And then I heard it. The soft, almost imperceptible sound of a slow, deliberate breath, being drawn in the absolute quiet. She was listening to me, too. The sound of that single drawn breath in the silent restroom was the most terrifying sound I have ever heard. It was the sound of patience. It was the sound of a predator who had all the time in the world, waiting for its prey to realize there was no escape. My body acted before my mind could fully process the horror. A jolt of pure adrenaline shot through me, unlocking my frozen limbs. I didn't scream. I didn't speak. I launched myself away from the wall, my shoulder slamming into the restroom door. It flew open with a bang, and I burst out into the dim, stale light of the gas station. My eyes flew to the counter, the sleeping cashier. He was my only hope, a witness, another human being. The stool was empty. He was gone. The spot where his head had been pillowed was now just a vacant stretch of formica. The store was silent, abandoned. It was just me, the humming refrigerators, and the woman in the coat standing in the stall behind me. The feeling of isolation was so complete, so suffocating. It was like a physical weight on my chest. I didn't stop. I ran. My purse banged against my hip. My car keys clutched so tightly in my fist, I could feel the metal teeth digging into my palm. The electronic chime of the door was a shrill shriek of alarm as I exploded out into the night air. My car was only 20 yards away, parked under that flickering, buzzing light. It looked a million miles away. I fumbled with the key fob, my hands shaking so violently I could barely press the unlock button. The car chirped, its lights flashing. A beautiful, technological promise of safety. I yanked the door open and threw myself inside, slamming it shut and jamming my thumb down on the lock button. The solid thunk of the locks engaging was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. I gasped, my breath coming in ragged, heaving sobs. I was safe. I was in my metal shell. I fumbled for the ignition, my key scraping against the steering column before finally sliding home. I turned it. The engine roared to life. And then I saw her. She wasn't running. She was just there, standing by the fuel pumps, maybe 15 feet from my bumper. The flickering overhead light strobed across her still form, making her appear like a ghostly image flickering in and out of existence. Her hands were no longer in her pockets. One was hanging at her side, but the other was held slightly away from her body. And her heavy winter coat was hanging open. Beneath it, tucked into the waistband of her jeans, was a glint of dull metal. It was short, thick, and had a wicked-looking curve to it. A hook knife, or something like it. The kind of tool not meant for utility, but for butchery. She took a step forward, her worn boots silent on the oil-stained concrete. Then another. Her head was tilted, and that same faint, empty smile was back on her face. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at my tires. Panic seized me anew. I threw the car into reverse, my head whipping around to look out the back window. As I did, I saw her break into a sudden, startling sprint. It wasn't a human run. It was a loping, powerful gait, covering the distance between us in a heartbeat. I slammed my foot on the accelerator. The car shot backward. Thump. She didn't try to stop the car. She lunged at it. Her body collided with my hood, her hands splaying out against the windshield on the passenger side. For a horrifying second, her face was pressed against the glass, her pale, sweating skin distorted, her blank eyes staring directly into mine. Then, as the car kept moving, she slid off, but not before her fingers dragged down the glass, leaving 4 long, greasy smears on the windshield. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I spun the wheel, crunched into drive, and stomped on the gas, speeding out of the lot and onto the dark welcome of the on-ramp. I didn't slow down until the gas station was a single, dim pinprick of light in my rearview mirror, and then nothing at all. I drove for an hour before my hands stopped shaking enough to call the police. The aftermath was a clinical, bureaucratic affair that did nothing to soothe the raw terror inside me. I gave my statement at a sheriff's office 2 counties over. The officers were polite, but skeptical. A woman in a winter coat? A possible knife? It sounded like the ramblings of someone who'd been on the road too long. Until they checked. They went to the gas station. The cashier, it turned out, had just been in the back stockroom. He claimed he heard nothing. But they found something. Behind the toilet in the second stall, wadded up and shoved into the plumbing, was a blood-stained rag. It wasn't mine. When they pulled the security footage, they discovered the system had been tampered with. The hard drive had been wiped clean for the entire hour surrounding my visit. The official report was filed as an attempted assault by an unknown party. They never found her. They never identified the blood. The case went cold, another mystery on the endless American highway. I finished my trip, but the joy was gone. Every rest stop, every gas station, became a potential house of horrors. I'd see a woman standing alone, and my heart would skip a beat. I started planning my trips around daylight hours, avoiding the darkness at all costs. The world had become a different place, a place where a quiet bathroom could be a hunting blind, and a smile could be a prelude to a scream. Sometimes the quietest places hold the loudest memories. The memory of those boots under the stall, the smear of her hand on my glass. They echo in the silence when I try to sleep. And as I tried to piece my life back together, scrolling through news feeds for any update, another story began to surface. It was fragmentary at first, mentioned on a trucker's forum, then in a brief regional news segment. Another strange event, this time on Interstate 70. A truck driver, a man named Larry D. Watson, reported being relentlessly pursued by a dark green van, its drivers using a bizarre and frightening trick to get him to pull over. The patterns were repeating, the horror changing its face, but never its intent. The road, it seemed, was full of open doors, and monsters were walking through all of them. My name is Larry D. Watson, and I've spent the better part of 30 years with a steering wheel in my hands, and the endless American highway stretching out before me. I've seen it all. Blizzards on the I-80 in Wyoming, torrential downpours that turned the I-10 into a river, and traffic jams outside Chicago that felt like they'd outlive me. You learn a rhythm, a kind of zen. The hum of the diesel becomes your heartbeat, the white line your pulse. You also learn to trust your gut. After 30 years, the road talks to you, and you learn to listen. I'd heard the stories, of course. They ripple through the CB radio and truck stop diners like a bad smell. The guy chased in Tennessee. The delivery driver ambushed in New Mexico. The woman stalked in a Kansas bathroom. You hear them, you shake your head, and you tell yourself it's a big country. The odds are long. Besides, my rig is my fortress. 18 wheels, 70 feet of steel, and enough torque to outrun most trouble. Or so I thought. It was on Interstate 70, cutting through the dark heart of Ohio, that the road started whispering a new, more personal warning. The clock on my dash read 2:18 a.m. The kind of deep night where the world belongs only to the desperate, the delirious, and the damned. I was fighting the fog of fatigue, my eyes gritty and my back aching. I needed to shut my eyes for just 20 minutes, just enough to take the edge off. I took the next exit for a rest area I knew well, a small wooded pull-off that was usually quiet. This night, it wasn't empty. I pulled my rig into a spot near the back. The air brakes hissing like a tired dragon settling in for the night. That's when I saw it. Parked at the far edge of the lot, deep in the shadow cast by a cluster of pines, was a dark green van. It was an old Ford, the kind with windows blacked out by spray-on tint or something darker. Its engine was off, and it sat there, silent and still. No lights on inside. It gave off a vibe, the kind you can't quantify but every fiber of your being recognizes. It felt like a spider, perfectly still in the center of its web. I tried to shrug it off. Just another traveler, I told myself. Maybe they're sleeping. But my gut, that old friend, was tying itself into a knot. I did my walk-around, thumping the tires out of habit, checking the straps on my load. The night was quiet, just the chirping of crickets and the distant moan of a lone semi on the highway. Then, as I passed the rear of my trailer, I heard it. A faint, metallic tap, 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 like someone lightly testing the lock on my cargo doors. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting a swath through the darkness. Nothing. The lot was still. The van sat unmoving. My heart was thumping a little harder now. Probably just the engine cooling, I reasoned. The logical part of my brain fighting a losing battle against the primal one. I climbed back into the cab, but I didn't recline the seat. I sat there, watching the van in my oversized side mirrors. For 10 minutes, nothing happened. Then, its headlights flicked on. Not the running lights, the full beams. They glared in my mirror for a 3 count, then snapped off, plunging the van back into silhouette. That was it. A signal, a challenge. I'd had enough. This rest was over. I fired up the engine. The familiar roar, a comfort. I pulled out of the spot and made my way back to the on-ramp, my eyes glued to the mirrors. The van's lights flared to life again. It pulled out of the shadows and smoothly merged onto the highway behind me. My mouth went dry. Here we go. For the first few miles, it just followed, maintaining a steady distance. Then, it began to close the gap. It crept up until it was riding my bumper, its high beams flooding my cab with blinding light. I adjusted my mirrors, my knuckles white on the wheel. What did they want? Then, the answer came. The van swerved slightly into the left lane, pulling up alongside my trailer. I glanced down, and there, pressed against the passenger side window, was a handwritten sign on a piece of torn cardboard. The words, scrawled in thick black marker, sent a jolt of ice water through my veins. Your back door is open. My mind raced. It was a classic trick. Get a trucker to pull over by warning them about a safety issue, then rob them when they're vulnerable. I knew this. I'd heard the stories. But what if it was true? What if a latch had jiggled loose on that bumpy road? I was hauling a load of consumer electronics. A lost crate would come straight out of my pocket. I couldn't afford the risk. Cursing under my breath, I put on my turn signal and started to guide the rig onto the wide, dark shoulder. It was probably a trap, but the gnawing professional doubt was too strong. I had to check. As the tires crunched on the gravel, I looked in the mirror. The green van was pulling over behind me. The moment my tires bit into the gravel of the shoulder, I knew I'd made a catastrophic mistake. In my side mirror, I saw the green van pull to a stop about 50 yards behind me, its engine idling, its headlights still on, holding me in their glare. They weren't getting out to help. They were waiting for me to get out. My cargo door wasn't open. It was a trick, just like I'd feared. A simple, brutal lure to get a lone trucker to isolate himself. The second my feet hit the pavement, they'd be on me. Anger, hot and sharp, cut through the fatigue. They'd used my own professionalism, my sense of duty, against me. Well, I still had one weapon they didn't. 80,000 pounds of momentum. I didn't even come to a full stop. I slammed the gear shift into a low gear, cranked the wheel back toward the highway, and stomped on the accelerator. The rig lurched violently, tires spitting gravel like gunshot. As I wrestled it back onto the asphalt, the van reacted instantly. Its engine roared, and it was on me again, this time with a renewed, aggressive fury. It swerved dangerously close to my rear wheels, trying to force me to brake. It flashed its brights in a frantic, strobing pattern. For 10 white-knuckled miles, it was a replay of every highway horror story I'd ever dismissed. A metal predator trying to run its prey to ground. But I had a plan. I remembered a crowded truck stop about 15 miles ahead. A 24/7 oasis with a bright diner and a full parking lot. I pushed my rig as hard as I dared, the van a persistent, angry shadow in my mirrors. When the glow of the truck stop appeared on the horizon, it felt like seeing the gates of heaven. I didn't slow down until I was turning into the lot, steering my truck into the well-lit heart of it, parking directly under a towering floodlight amidst a dozen other rigs. I killed the engine, my entire body trembling with spent adrenaline. I watched in the mirror. The green van slowed, cruising past the entrance. It circled the perimeter once, like a shark, before parking in a dark corner at the far end of the lot. The driver and passenger doors opened, and two men got out. They were just silhouettes, but they moved with a casual, confident slowness that was more threatening than any frantic charge. They didn't look at the other trucks. They walked straight into the diner. Through the large plate glass window, I watched them. They took a booth, didn't order. They just sat there, their heads turned, staring directly at me through the window. Their faces were blank, expressionless. It was the same dead-eyed look Robert had described, the same predatory patience Eva had felt. They were telling me they knew where I was, and they weren't afraid. That's when Big Mike, a haulier I knew from the CB, saw what was happening. He followed my gaze, saw the two men staring, and without a word, he stood up. He was a mountain of a man, a former bouncer. He walked over to their booth, his shadow falling over them. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw his posture, the way he leaned in. The two men looked up at him, then at each other. Without a word of argument, they slid out of the booth, walked out of the diner, got in their van, and drove away into the night. It was over, but the proof came later. When I did my post-trip inspection back at the depot the next morning, I found them on the rear door of my trailer. Right by the lock mechanism were a series of greasy, dark handprints. Someone had been trying to force it open while I was inside that rest area washroom, their fingers scrabbling at the metal just feet from where I stood. The police later confirmed the van was linked to a string of robberies targeting long haulers. They were never caught. They say the highways are long, but some roads remember you. Robert A. Wood still jumps at the sound of a horn blaring in the dead of night, the echo of a crash that left no body, only footprints into nothingness. Jeffrey Huffman works a day job in the city now, and every time he sees a stranded motorist, his foot instinctively presses harder on the accelerator. A ghost named Lisa forever in his passenger seat. Eva J. Bush plans her routes with military precision, ensuring she never has to stop after dark. The memory of a pair of worn boots under a stall door forever burned behind her eyelids. And me, Larry D. Watson, the old road dog who thought he'd seen it all, now refuses to drive nights alone. I see every darkened van as a hunter, every rest area as a potential ambush. The open road I loved feels like a contested territory, and the silence between towns now sounds like a held breath. We are just four voices, four stories plucked from the millions who travel the black ribbon each night. We survived. But our stories are a warning, a testament to the truth that on the vast, anonymous stage of the American highway, the most frightening monsters don't live in the woods. They drive on four wheels. They wave for help. They sit in silence. They hold up signs. So next time you're out after midnight and see headlights appear in your mirror, don't assume it's just another driver. Some of us are still out there, looking for the ones who got away.